Hello, my name is Gordon Ferguson. This podcast series was prompted by a near-death experience that led me to many spiritual insights that I felt compelled to share with you. The backstory began in January 2022 when I was diagnosed with cancer. Several weeks after that, the treatment began, consisting of both chemotherapy and radiation, 5 days a week. Then, after 3 weeks, calamity struck. I found out that I had an enzyme deficiency that happens to collide with this particular kind of chemotherapy and can be fatal. It led to a 23-day stay in the hospital, during which time I didn't know if I would live or die. The physical aspects of it were horrendous. The spiritual aspects, on the other hand, were quite the opposite. Sitting on the brink of eternity with God led to these insights that I'm compelled to share. Each episode will consist of me doing some sharing, very informally, like a fireside chat, and then we'll have a guest who will be able to ask me questions and we can have some dialogue together. So with that introduction in mind, let's begin. Hello there. Welcome to episode 3 of this podcast series about what I learned about God and God in me through about 1 month of being deathly ill. So today we're going to talk about God and me and talk about a personal relationship with God. And you hear people use that terminology, a personal relationship with God. What does that mean? A personal relationship. When I think about a personal relationship with someone, be it my wife or some of my dearest friends or relatives or whatever, I think about a relationship that could have the words warm and fuzzy attached to it. And so, do we have that kind of relationship with God? Can we have it? Is that what He even wants? You know, you read the Old Testament, and one thing that I know He wants is reverence and awe before Him. When He speaks, we listen. When He commands, we obey. That theme comes out in the Old Testament especially over and over, and it's in the New Testament as well. So God, I know, wants us to fear Him in the right way, not the wrong way, but can we have that personal relationship that has some warm and fuzzy attached to it? You know, for me, the answer kind of came in stages. One of the things that helped me the most, not surprisingly, was the book of Romans. That was Martin Luther's book. That was a key book in many lives of many theologians in history. But for me, I started teaching Romans fairly early. I mentioned that I went through a ministry training school. We called it a preacher school. And I went through that and then was invited back fairly soon to teach in it, which was surprising. I was picked a bit early there, I think, but still, I think did a relatively good job. But at any rate, I became the Romans teacher. That was my gig. I did Romans, I did Revelation, I did homiletics or preaching. I did those all the time for all the students. And so I studied Romans, and I had some really good material that I developed. I stole some of the illustrations from other people, but at any rate, I think it was a really good series that I did, even fairly early on, that helped me a lot. Well, then later, I began to put that into print form. I've got a picture here to throw up. I did a booklet called Justified. And even the subtitle says what justified means. Actually, it is a legal term in Greek, and it means innocent or not guilty. And so the way that we usually say justified to get that point across is in the subtitle, if you can see it, and it says, just as if I'd never sinned. That's what it really does mean. It means when we're forgiven, it's just as if I'd never sinned. And then the other picture is a book where I expanded it all into a book form. And so that's a commentary, practical exposition of Romans called Romans, the Heart Set Free. And so I've taught these many, many times in many, many places. It's always popular to have Romans taught because it helps people in their view of God and their view of themselves. A very, very important book. And so God does want a personal relationship with us. He does want it to be warm and fuzzy. And so I think about, okay, how about a hug? Does God give us hugs and kisses? Does He do that? And the truth is, I do believe He does. But you have to get that mindset to really see God as He is and relate to Him the way that we can and should. I remember thinking about a hug from God one day, and I'm going to describe a very unusual circumstance. But how does God give us hugs? Well, He does it through other people for sure. Sometimes I tell people, whatever you get from me, however much love you feel from me, just recognize I am a vessel of God. He is the one hugging you through me. Multiply it a few million times, and you'll have an accurate picture of how much God really loves you. And so other people hugging you and giving you encouragement in whatever way. I get many letters and emails and things that are so encouraging that reduce me to tears. That's a hug from God. If it weren't for God in their lives, they wouldn't be doing that. So it's a hug from God. And then I think about God answering prayers. Sometimes God answers some unusual prayers, some miraculous prayers, and boy, you feel hugged by God. But there are other ways to be hugged by God also. And I want to share one of these with you that, truthfully, I would have thought was just plain weird earlier in my life. Now, that's an air vent. My wife and I have a little 2-bedroom cottage across the street from a lake in East Texas. And this air vent is right by the bed, and you can't change the direction of the airflow. Half of it goes one way and half of it goes the other way. And I sleep on the side of the bed where it blows right into my face. Now, that's all nice when it's wintertime. But in the summertime, that cold air in my face isn't so pleasant. So one day I got up and I looked at that and I said to myself, God, I need a hug today. Maybe it was during my prayer time, prayer walk, whatever. I need a hug today. I'm just in a shape that I need a hug from you. I need to feel you today. I need to see you today. And so what happened was I got thinking about that vent when I got out of bed. And I said, I'm going to look in my garage and see if there's anything that might be able to help with the air vent. Now, obviously, I could put a box in front of it, but I thought maybe there's something custom made that would work. I walked out to our detached garage. I opened the door. I immediately saw that plastic container sitting on a shelf. I don't remember that container. I don't remember ever seeing that container. I don't know why it was there. I don't know where it came from, to be honest, but it was there. And I thought, wow, that looks like it's the right size for that air vent. I grabbed it. I ran back in. It was the perfect size. I cut off one end so it would make all the air blow the other way. I've since found another use for it, by the way, but I just felt hugged by God. Now, as I said at one time, I would have thought that's pretty crazy, but I don't think it's crazy now. I think God does all kinds of little things in our lives just because He loves us, just because we have a relationship with Him, and He wants us to be happy and to feel good. God wants to be seen, and God can be seen. In one of my articles on my website, I think it's one of those roller coaster articles, I mentioned an illustration about God that He can be seen. And in the story, you can read it on my website, but in the story, basically, I went into a grove of fruit trees with a friend, and he remarked how many plums there were that year. He said, it's staggering how many plums are here. And I looked up and I thought he was kidding. I did not see one plum. And I said, "You're kidding me, right?" He said, "No, this place is loaded. Just look up." I looked up again and tried to focus in a different way, and all of a sudden, I saw the plums. They were the same color as the leaves. That's why I didn't see them sooner, but they were everywhere. Thousands of plums. And God sometimes is like that. You don't see Him until you do. There are other things in life like that. You can't see it, and then all of a sudden you do, and you can't unsee it if you wanted to. It's just there. And God is like that. He can be seen, and He wants to be seen. And so in my articles, there's an article that I wrote about my early life, and it's entitled, "I Have Lost My Faith," and then the rest of it is, in parentheses, "in coincidences." And that went back through my early life. It's kind of an unusual prequel to a book I wrote several years back called My Three Lives. My Three Lives is about my three religious experiences, so my walk with God historically. But the little article that I've lost my faith in coincidences goes back through my secular life before I really got spiritual and focused on God. And it's amazing to me, all of the little details that were back there that I'm convinced were God preparing me for ministry later in life. I told someone that to really know me better than anyone does, better than my parents ever did, is you can take that little article, "I've Lost My Faith in Coincidences," and then combine it with that other book I mentioned, which is My Three Lives. And then I also wrote one the same year of My Three Lives called "Fairy Tales Do Come True." And those are the covers of those two books. But if you take that article and those two books, you can know everything there is to be known about my life, almost. And so after I'm gone, I'm sure I'll have grandkids and others that will finally read my books, by the way, because they'll want to know more about their granddad than they may want to know right now. But basically, God can be seen. He wants to be seen. He can be seen. A part of our struggle, I think, in seeing God correctly is terminology, even how He is described. You know, I look at terms like judge and creator and Lord of lords and King of kings, and those are about His power and about His position. They don't conjure up warm and fuzzy feelings. But those are just His descriptions in one way. After you're converted, you're introduced to some terms that are much more endearing. He's Father. He is Abba, which is like our word in English, Dad. He is friend. Jesus said in John 13, "You call me sir, you call me teacher and master," and that's what I am. But then in chapter 15 of John, verse 15, He says, "I no longer call you servants, I call you friends, because I have made known to you my master's business." And so as converted people, when we are saved people, spiritual children of God, not just physical children, but spiritual children of God, then it's all in a different light. And so in the Great Commission, why do we call it commission? It is a co-mission of us and God. No wonder Jesus concluded Matthew 28, the Great Commission, by saying, "I am with you always to the very end of the age." That is just God. And so there is a friend, Proverbs said, chapter 18, who sticks closer than a brother. And when we have the kind of relationship with God that I believe God calls us to have and longs for us to have with Him, then hymns with choruses like this one make sense to us. Here's the first verse of a song that I've sung many times. It's a popular church hymn. My God and I go through fields together. We walk and talk as good friends should and do. We clasp our hands, our voices ring with laughter. My God and I through the meadows hew. And so that's a song that may seem strange to you if you don't have the right view of God. That if you have the view of God that I believe God wants you to have, then all of that is the way it is in our walk with God. And I learned a lot about that in those long nights with God. We talked a lot. I talked and he listened, but I think he put things in my mind as well. I have no doubt about that. But I know that Psalm 139 became a very important verse to me. I love Psalm 139. You should read it often, actually. But he says this down in verse 15, or 16 rather. It's all good. But he says, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. So as I had those long talks at night with God, just friend to friend, I ended up most of those nights by saying, Lord, Abba, I'm going to try to go to sleep. I don't know if I can or not, but I'm going to give it a whirl here. I don't know if I'm going to wake up here or with you. I don't know if I'm going to live or die during the rest of this night. But it's beyond my pay grade anyway. You've already said in Psalm 139 that all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came into existence. Before I drew my first breath, you knew the day I would die, how I would die, everything about it. And so that's your domain. I'm going to let you worry about that. Not that God worries, but that's your wheelhouse, not mine. So I'm going to try to get some sleep, and whether I stay here or whether I wake up with you, that's all in your hands. We're friends. I'm going to try to sleep. In Jesus' name, amen. And so that's how I signed off most nights. And truthfully, I thought a lot about, do I want to wake up with him or stay here? I have family. I want to encourage them. I don't want to leave them. But truthfully, the thought that hit me over and over is if I get through this, that only means that I'm going to have to go through something else like this because I am going to die. It's appointed unto man wants to die, and I'm going to do it. I don't know when or how. But many of those nights I said, Lord, I don't know what I even want to do because if I get through this sickness, I'm going to have to repeat something like this to actually get to eternity. So that is podcast 3, my presentation aspect of it. In our format, we're going to move to questions and answers. We had Yuliana Upchurch on for the first session, her husband Mike for the second, and now we're going to have Yuliana back with us for this third session to ask some questions that hopefully will reflect questions that you would answer, but certainly it'll be another part of the program that I think you'll really enjoy. So thanks for hanging with us. In a few moments, we'll be back with the second part of the program. As you can tell by now, we're focusing more and more on not only the nature of God, but our relationship with Him. And certainly this particular podcast goes into that quite a bit. So it's great to have you again. It's also great to have Yuliana back with us. So Yuliana, you've listened to what I've had to say, and you're the question asker who is representing a lot of other people watching this now. So what questions do you have?
Well, thank you for having me again. I get what you mean about having that early disconnect you had in having a personal relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people can relate, and whatever experiences we have, it's what shapes the view that we have towards God.
Exactly.
What would be one advice or your advice to people that struggle? How do you battle that?
Well, it depends on what their struggle is. One thing, it's a generational thing in a lot of ways. Older people, especially people in my age group and probably down to, I don't know, maybe age 60, 65, we were raised in what is typically called the hell and brimstone area. We heard a lot about the judgment of God, heaven and hell, a lot of things that are not popular topics today. Some of them should be a lot more, honestly. But anyway, we were raised with that, so we tend to view God in a harsh way, or view him as harsh, rather. On the other hand, younger people, I think, who have been raised permissively especially, they tend to see God as an old man in a rocking chair saying, well, kids will be kids no matter what they do, it's okay. So I think it's sort of a generational thing there and how we view God.
Because to me, I view God as love and mercy and grace. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people view God in a fearing way, like to fear God and mm-hmm. God is going to punish you.
Right.
How do you change that mindset?
Well, again, it's generational. You're half my age. So it's not surprising that you tend to look at God more the loving side, the gentle side, the mercy side, etc., which on your part is good, as long as you don't get permissive and take advantage of God's loving nature. But older people are going to struggle more with what I have. So how do you correct it? You do it biblically. And as I said in my presentation part, the book of Romans has been a tremendous help to me. And so I did a lot of teaching on Romans, both back in a ministry training setting where I was the Romans instructor. And then I was asked to go all over the country and speak in different churches and do a series on Romans. So I've done it many, many times. And when I was doing that, then everything just sort of settled in. I had a good view of God. But I think in later years, especially as I'm getting close to meeting God and realizing that, I think for that reason, perhaps I've had to struggle with it more. But it gets back to going into the Bible itself and looking at all of it, not just one side. Fearing God is used in two ways. To fear God is a right thing, but it means to reverence him, to totally respect him, to know that he is the ultimate authority and the final judge. Then there's a fear, like I have of snakes, for example. That's a different kind of fear. And that's the kind of fear of God that we should not have. So there are two kinds of fear.
Okay, and how do you separate that though? How do you view him as a loving God and not a fearing God?
I think it's getting the balance of all the Bible's teaching. You got both kinds. And as a parent, as a parent, there are times when you have to be pretty strict because the kid's about to do something really stupid, and so you're going to take a stronger stand with them. You might even yell at them. If they're about to run out in the street when they're 4 years old, you may yell at them.
Right.
But on the other hand, come bedtime, we're in there with our kids, getting them to sleep and relax and telling them a story or praying with them or whatever. So you've got to have the balance and to realize that God's balance is perfect. He uses the strict time at just the right time. He uses the other time at just the right time. We as parents make mistakes. He does not. But we have to look biblically at all of it, and we have to look at our lives. That's the thing about me. Even when my view's weird, I stop and think, why is it weird? God's been so kind to me in so many ways for so many years.
In what areas did you struggle? You mentioned earlier that you struggled. How did you struggle in those areas in being confident that God is taking care of you?
Well, just I think focusing too much on the way I was raised. We tend to have formative years. And so whatever they are, I'm not a child psychologist, but they'll tell you there are certain years in a child's age that are most impactful and formative of a lot of concepts. And so my early days were so steeped in viewing God with the wrong kind of fear that that's always going to come back to me if I let it. So I'm always looking for ways and scriptures and explanations to help me deal with that. But I have to deal with it. There are certain things you always have to deal with, and that's one of mine.
And what's one advice you can give us parents on how to raise our kids to respect God, but not to fear him in a fear of like punishment?
Well, I think there needs to be the right kind of fear toward punishment. Heaven and hell. Jesus said more about hell than he did almost any subject. I mean, it's incredible if you go through the gospel accounts how much Jesus said about hell and how bad it was. So why did he do that? He was trying to keep people from going there, and he had to get their attention as to the seriousness of the choices they were making. So I think with our children, they need to know that side, but they need to know, as James put it, that mercy triumphs over judgment. That God is merciful, and even when he had to discipline people, and does have to discipline people, he doesn't like to do it. He doesn't want to have to do it, but if he has to for their sake, he will do it. Just like with your children. I mean, I can remember my parents giving me discipline, and in my day, it was definitely to the backside with a belt or something. And they would say, "This hurts me more than it hurts you." And I thought, yeah, well, let's switch places. But the truth is, as a parent, it does. It's very hard to discipline your children. You love them so much. And when you have to apply discipline, it's hard. And I think it's difficult for God. He loves us so much, he doesn't want to. And explanation. That's what kids need. A lot of explanation about life. All of it, and especially about God.
Right. You mentioned illustrations you included in your print offerings on the lesson of Romans a while back. Still brings tears to my eyes. I'm curious, what are they? Can you describe a few of these?
Well, they're all in the book. You just need to get the book and read it. But I did read that one called The Advocate, I think is the title that I read. But that one always gets me and gets most people when I do read it, because it shows how much God is on our side, even from the legal sense. God is just. Justice will be done. That's why he died on a cross in the form of Jesus. But he's always going to be just. But even from a courtroom standpoint, that little story, The Advocate, is one of my favorite. But there are many others in my Romans book. In fact, I pulled them all out one time, made a separate document that I occasionally go back and read. Some of them are amazing.
And where did you say you have those? Can people have access to them? Or
yeah, they're all in the longer book on Romans. I have the booklet Justified, and then I have the full book, which is a much expanded version of that, which is simply called Romans, the Heart Set Free. And I have all of them in that.
Okay. And what words of wisdoms would you share with someone who might struggle with blaming God for the pain they've experienced in their life? How can you move past that?
Okay, that's one of the biggest things. They say that the atheist, his best argument will always be, why do good people suffer? The problem of evil. I studied under a person in grad school and seminary who was a debater, and he debated atheists. And that was his deal. He had a PhD in philosophy. He was a very good debater, very skilled in logic and all of that. But he said the biggest argument an atheist has is the problem of evil. And so when things happen to us that we can't explain, that God obviously allowed, then we have to deal with that. And there have been things that happened in my life that at the time I was going through it, I hated it. And then I look back years later at it and think, wow, that helped make me who I am, the good part of me. And so it's through the trials and how we handle them that we actually grow. I don't recall growing spiritually in good times, but I recall growing spiritually in the tough times that I held on to God in and allowed Him to mold me as the potter molds the clay. Those are the times that I think I grew the most. But it's hard. It's very, very hard. People tend to blame God. And I've just got to say that whatever God allows, He's going to help me get through it. And there is some reason there for me or someone else that I'm going to influence.
How have you built your relationship to see God as a friend?
Well, I talked about that some in the presentation, but I go heavily on the words of Jesus. He said in John 13:13, you call me Master and Lord, and that's what I am, or Master and Teacher. And then, though, he says in John 15:15, I no longer call you servants, but friends. So I know that's ultimately what God wants with all of us, to get our attention enough to get us out of the sin that's going to destroy our lives, to get us out of sin, to really seek Him and a relationship with Him. And I do believe He wants to be a friend, and a warm and fuzzy friend, because that's all you and I know about it, right?
Right. And how, when you were in the hospital, you mentioned also talking about how you feel hugs from people. Those are hugs that come from God.
Mm-hmm.
During your stay in the hospital, did you feel hugs by God?
I did, in probably many ways. People were very nice to me. I made the statement, which is totally true, and it's going to be gross if you don't know all of my experience, but I said in the hospital, I had more different people change my diaper than I ever had as a kid, as a baby, because they had to change my diaper. I couldn't move. I couldn't lift my heel off the bed. I couldn't do a thing. I couldn't get up and go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And so people were nice to me. And I felt that, and I thanked them. And I said everything good I could to the people in the hospital because they were phenomenal. And so I got lots of hugs that way. But, my family came up a lot. They were always there. There was somebody. I had one brother, Dave Malutnock, who is the CEO of Hope Worldwide. We've been good friends for years. As soon as he heard about my condition and the fact I could die, he got on an airplane and flew to Dallas. And he spent several days with me. He'd do his work during the day, but at night he'd be with me. And so I had people go out of their way. And I'm going to talk about that in one of the presentations, the names of people that just wanted to be there, sleep on a couch, be interrupted all hours of the night, not get any sleep. They just want to be there. There are many ways that I felt hugged in the hospital, but I definitely did from just talking with God. So I think we'll cut her off at this point, but it's been great to have you again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for the questions, and I'm sure there are many more that people have, and one day maybe we'll get them all answered. But God is unpredictable, and we have to walk by faith and not by sight.
Right.
So thanks for tuning in again. It's been good to have you. Thanks again to Rick for being the AV man and doing his miracles and putting all this together pro bono, just because he wants to serve and he loves God and he loves people. So thanks very much to Yuliana for being back on. Thanks to Rick for putting it all together. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be back with you soon with episode number 4.